What's up? Hope everyone's having a good day and is ready to get started on another video in the series we like to call Underrated Throwers. So today we got a very special one that I think is criminally underrated, and it's Betty Heidler, former world record holder before Anita, and a really significant part in women's hammer throwing history. Because before her, the world record wasn't even close to 80 meters. I think it was around like 77 meters or so. She threw 79.80 something. And she was the closest woman to even get close to 80 meters. And after she threw that, people thought, oh, maybe it's actually possible for a woman to throw 80 meters. And then Anita came along and just smashed all that. But, I think Betty Heidler is also very underrated because, I don't know, like, nobody even talks about her. People like to hype up, for good reason, like Anita, Deanna Price, Anderson Brooks, and all of them. But, I mean, let's not get it twisted. Like, 79 meters, I'm pretty sure is still a top 5 throw in women's hammer throwing history. And that's a really, really far throw. A really far throw. That will basically win any competition ever. Considering there's only been 3 women in history to ever throw over 80. And Betty Heidler is also the 2007 world champion in Osaka. A Olympic medalist, a 2-time silver medalist as well in world championships, a European champion. I'll link all her accomplishments and personal best and height and weight and her coach and all that in the video description. She's from Germany, who I believe, honestly, them in the U.S. probably have like the sickest uniforms ever, besides maybe the Japanese uniforms. But just, I don't know why. Just Germany just knows how to make a uniform look good. But we're just gonna get straight in. This is her throw in Osaka in 2007, her winning throw. And this was the last World Championships that someone other than Anita didn't win for a long time. So, let's get it started. So, good winds. So, she likes to stay very upright, head facing that way. And really likes... I think she throws a lot like Koji in many ways. Koji Murafushi, just by the way she winds. Obviously, Koji does 2 winds instead of 3, but they really like to have a very steep first turn instead of a flat one, and really like to start kind of wide and then get narrower as they go throughout the turns. So right here, she really likes to drive that down. And you'll notice as she's driving down, she sits back. Her hips go back right there. And you'll notice also that her feet aren't turning until the ball gets past 0. And 0 is basically for your belly button. And your belly button. That's 0 for people who, like, when hammer coaches or hammer throwers say you got to move the ball past 0 and all that, that's what they mean. But they're here. She's here. Very good. And you'll notice that she's letting the hammer turn her. Her feet don't move until they get past 0. So she's not turning ahead of the ball. She's letting the ball turn her. And that's very important. Because that means you're actually pushing it and the ball is moving faster than you, which is very important. And it's very easy not to do that. It's very easy to want to turn, especially if you're not a pure hammer thrower and you like to throw shot and disc. I see it a lot of the time in people like that really like to turn ahead of the hammer and stuff because they're so used to, especially discus throwers, like having the discus behind their hip, and they're really used to having, and so they kind of throw with a hammer behind their hip. But you'll notice how she kind of gets this jackknife a little. It's hard to tell because of the quality of this video, because it's from 2007. But right there. Stop moving. Right. God. She moves so fast, it's hard to get. Come on. You got it. There we go. So her hands right here, the hammer here. So she kind of gets a little jackknife, a little bit. And that's a good thing. What you don't want is a jackknife up, so your hands down here. Oh my god. I do that all the time. Sorry. Your hands down here and the hammer up here. That's not what you want. This is the kind of jackknife you want, because that just means you're actually pushing the hammer. If you push the hammer, it will inevitably be a little behind you for a split second when you're moving that aggressively. And especially for women's hammer, you see that a lot, just because, I mean, these women can just overpower a hammer because they're just so strong compared to like a 4K hammer, and also compared to a men versus 6, like women, they can throw really far just bullying a hammer. Like you could throw 60 plus meters. I've seen women just throw 60 plus meters just bullying and muscling a hammer, just because if they're strong enough and explosive enough, you can. You cannot do that as women. So it's very, as a guy, I tend not to look at women's hammer throw for technical things, just because they throw the hammer very differently. It's not wrong. They're just using certain things to their advantage because it's so light. So if you're a guy, I wouldn't recommend watching women's hammer for technical things. I would tend to watch more men's hammer, just because I tend to think of it as two different sports in a way, honestly. And the same thing for all the events, like especially women's disc, women's and men's disc. You know, women can get away with certain things. Same thing here. So, but let's get back to this. So it's here. Really nice, still staying grounded. And I tend to notice, and I think I mentioned this in my last hammer video, I tend to notice, so you really want to try and stay grounded until here. Well, until here. But when you're moving at such high speeds, people, like, you'll pick up the right foot a little soon, just because you're just moving at such high speeds. And I think people confuse that with, oh, they're just picking up their right leg and they throw really far, like picking up the right leg really early, so they throw really far. But when you watch them and watch these guys in practice, or these women in practice, they turn all the way and stay grounded when they're going slow, like doing drills and stuff. So in their mind, they're thinking stay grounded and like turn and try and stay on the ground as long as possible. So that's also why I think it's more valuable to watch practice throws than competition throws, because you get to see, you know, if they're what they're working on, you know, especially if they have audio and you can hear like the coach or something, or them, or they're actually explaining what they're trying to work on in the video. But it's just a lot more interesting, at least to me, and a lot more valuable to look at throwers' training videos and all that, or just watch them train if you get the privilege of watching them train at this kind of level, than watching competition throws. You know, competition throws are great, like, to watch the finished product, but I like to watch like how they got that finished product. And I like both, but maybe I'm just a nerd. But I tend to think it's more valuable to watch what they're working on, because they may be working on something you're working on, and they might have some useful information to help you. So right here, very good. Oh, sorry. I was going to mention this. So, that steep, it's not that steep, but normally what you want is the hammer to be here instead of here. Jeez, those are bad lines. There instead of there. Want it a little flatter, especially if you're a 4-turner. If you're a 3-turner, that's different. Then you want this kind of steep orbit just because you have less turns to build an orbit. But as a 4-turner, I would tend to want a flatter orbit. But also, that's a difference between men and women. Men tend to have the flatter orbits. Usually. There are some different cases, like Kibwe Johnson or Koji. But, for the most part, they tend to have a flatter orbit. But women can get away with stuff like this. Just because, they can. I'm not saying she's bullying it, but, it's very easy just to overpower the hammer. And it's also important, when I say that women can get away with bullying a hammer, I'm not saying they should. I'm just saying you can. But bullying any implement, and overpowering any implement, will only get you so far. I've never seen a woman throw over 70 meters bullying a hammer. So I will say that. There's always a cap on it. So I would focus on technique and all that. But, if you have no intention of throwing over 70 meters and you just want to throw far in college or whatever, then just bully the hell of it. Well, I'm not your coach. Or if I am, don't bully it. But work on technique and listen to what what I'm saying. But here, she's very good. I would like a little steeper of a catch. I would say, I would like her to catch right there instead of here. And that's why I tend to like staying a little more grounded. But I tend to see women pick up their right foot a lot earlier too, just because they're just moving so much faster. Because they don't need to be as patient with the 4K. So they tend to rely a lot more on speed and momentum rather than working it that much. A la like Cameron Rogers. So right here, very good. Oh, but sorry, I was going to explain this. The reason why I would prefer her to stay on, and this is just me, to stay on the ground, the first turn doesn't really, it does matter, but the first turn is just really just to get rhythm and just set up. I'd like to think of the first turn as an extension of your winds, and then 2, 3, 4 is when you start applying real force. Alright, and it's different in a 3-turn. A 3-turn, you want to apply force almost immediately, because you just don't have that much time. But 4-turn, your first turn can be a lot slower and a lot less, you don't have to be as back. You can be a little more relaxed. And then 2, 3, 4, you can really start to hit the shit out of it. Alright, so you're right here. She's right here. And the reason why I'd like her to stay a little grounded is because when you pick up too early, you tend to catch really, really shallow instead of really deep. So she kept on the ground and then just hung on the hammer. So she just hung on it right here. And her upper body didn't really move. And then she just put her right foot down. She would catch it really deep. And then she would have all this time to work rather than this time to work. But this is her first turn. So she doesn't have to catch it that deep. So right here, a very good back. I really love her counter. It's honestly really hard for women, I feel, to counter a hammer just because it's just so light. So you tend to see them be a little more upright and not so down. She honestly kind of throws like a guy in many ways. she's one of the few women I see that actually stay down and like actually like count. Like honestly, I mean every woman at this kind of level counters the hammer, but she really counters the hammer. So I really like to sit back, and you notice how she's sitting back. She's not like sticking her butt out, because people tend to think, oh, sit back, so I'll just stick my butt out. But when you stick your butt out, your chest will collapse and you'll lose your counter, and the hammer will pull you forward. You want to think about sitting down and then leaning slightly back while keeping relaxed shoulders and long arms. That's what you want to do. So you want to think about just sitting in the chair. Like if someone was to grab the head of the ball right here and try and pull you forward, and then you just sit back. That's what you want to think of. Like physically sitting into a chair. That's how you counter. And then as you go through your turns and apply more force and more speed, that tends to get a lot deeper and deeper and deeper, and you'll be leaning really far back, really far back, really far back. Like if you didn't have a hammer in your hand, you would just fall straight down. That's how much you should be back. You should be actually honestly unbalanced when you throw the hammer, and it's a very, at this kind of level, they're not really balanced. They're balanced but not balanced. It's very hard to describe unless you felt that. There's a video on that Sean Donnelly did that explains this a lot better. He obviously knows more about hammer than me. You know, he's a 79 meter hammer thrower. I think 78. But I mean, go check out his YouTube channel. I think it's either on his Koji Murafushi technical analysis or his Prismos Cosmos technical analysis video. They're both fantastic. I would highly recommend watching them. But he explains a lot more in depth about that kind of concept, about staying balanced and but while being unbalanced. So I would check him out for that. I'm not gonna go very in depth into that because we'd be here forever, and I've been told that my videos are way too long. So we'll get into this a little more. So very good. Turn. And you'll notice she's starting to catch a little deeper. And then boom, sit back again. Sit back. Now I think she's a little late with her right foot. Right here in the finish. But you'll notice on this fourth turn, her right foot gets down, and then immediately sits back, pushes the hammer down, 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 while she's going back, while her head is back. And then boom, let's go. And you'll notice when she does this, it's not her arms. She kind of just turns through it. In the finish in the hammer, you just want to let it happen. You want to think about it as just another turn, except you're not actually turning. It's just a turn before you actually leave the ground. And that's what you want to think about, and then just stick it. The second you try and throw with your arms, you'll get it out of orbit. You'll throw yourself really off balance. You'll lose your counter, and you just won't throw far. You see, I don't care who it is. Any thrower that throws over 70 meters will not finish with their arms. They'll just push. And what I mean by finish with their arms, I mean obviously they're finishing with their arms. I mean lifting with their arms. So really not using any hips and just trying to like uppercut the hammer. That's what I mean. And a lot of beginners tend to do this because one, they don't apply enough force to feel that, so they're not going fast enough to like feel a proper release, and two, inexperience, and three, because it feels powerful. You know, you feel strong doing it, but you won't throw very far doing it. just because something feels strong does not mean it's strong. Like in shot put or discus, like jumping at the finish, yeah, it feels strong, but you won't go very far. But like the throw won't go very far. And that's a very important lesson that a lot of beginners need to understand. Is that, and I see this a lot. Like some athletes will just think, "Oh, my coach doesn't know anything because like this feels really strong and all that," and they have to remember they don't throw very far. And you look, and generally, and there are some bad coaches, you know, inevitably, there's always bad coaches in any field, in any sport. And I'm not dissing any coaches, I love my fellow throwing coaches. But I tend to think sometimes athletes don't give tend I tend to see this a lot in throwing, that you'll get especially if you get a new coach that just replaced the coach that you really liked. I would say give them a chance. In college, I had a coach every 2 years. And the first one didn't really know much, but he was a good person. The second one knew a lot, just didn't want to teach, or just didn't want to be there. And then the third one really knew what he was doing, and he's still my coach to this day. So, and he's a good people person. So but I really never argued with my coach or anything. It's important, even if you have a bad coach and you know it. The worst thing you can do is just be like, "Oh, coach, you stupid. I ain't gonna like listen to you." Because no matter what, even if you have a bad coach, if you don't listen to the coach, it's just gonna make your life miserable. Because at the end of the day, he can fire you, or cut you from the team, and all that. So and the coach can make your life miserable. Especially, so I'm not saying don't stand up for yourself, but I'm saying don't just outright just defy a coach and something, because chances are maybe he's not bad and maybe you just don't want to listen. I know that I've come across a lot of throwers, and I used to be like this, that coming up in high school and stuff, all these coaches are gassing you up and are saying that you're very like, "Oh wow, you have such good technique," and "Oh wow," and it took one coach and one athlete to say, "Yo, your technique sucks," and that was me. Like all throughout high school, everyone always told me, "Oh wow, you have really good technique," and all that. My first year at college, my first coach in college, he's like, "Oh wow, Adam, your technique is so pretty," and all that. And like, "Oh wow, like it's so good. You have the best technique out of everyone." And it took one athlete and one coach to say, "Wow, Adam, your technique really sucks." And I took a big offense to that. Because, if you've been told, "Oh, wow, you've been really good your entire life," and then one person comes like, "Wow, you really suck." But then I had to look in the mirror, and I was man enough to be like, "Why does my technique suck?" And then they explained, "It looks pretty, but you're not producing any force and all that." And I think that's the case a lot of the times, especially in hammer, is that just because a throw looks good does not mean it throws far. The best technique is the technique that goes the furthest. It doesn't matter how ugly it is or what. The best technique is the technique that goes the furthest. So that's just a lesson in that, and just coaching, like just how to treat your coaches and how a coach should treat you. Now, obviously, if a coach is mistreating you, stand up for yourself and all that. But I will say, if you don't like a coach, then, just get outside coaching or something, or just something like that. Or try what the coach is saying, and if it's not working, then actually have a conversation with them. But, that's all I'm going to say on that. But back to Betty Heidler. And I know I tend not to say very much in these technical analysis about the actual throwers. But that's because, I mean, there's not really much to say just because their technique is all the throwers I do, unless they do something very unique. Like, really, there's nothing to complain or, like, say wrong about Betty Heidler's technique. Really, all I could really think of is, oh, her right foot just picks up a little too soon. But, I mean, in woman's hammer throw, I mean, it doesn't really matter. So, but I will say a big thing to take away from this is, especially for men, I would recommend just trying to stay grounded as long as possible. I tend to like to think, so when you're here, I tend to think, make like a X. Wow, that's not a good X. An X. What the? There we go. An X with your knees. So then all you have to do is you just hang. God damn it. You just hang on the hammer, and then you just step. And as long as you hang on the hammer right here, your foot will just come down. So as you're hanging on the hammer, you sink down with your knees. So don't think about just stomping, because in hammer you don't want to stomp. You want to be light on your feet, just like in any throwing event. You know, you don't want to just stomp. You know, you want to be light. So just think about your knees and hips dropping to the ground. Kind of like how they drop it, how your left knee would drop out to the ground, like the 9 o'clock drop in discus and shot put. You kind of want to feel a little bit of that kind of motion. And then what that will do is, instead of catching here, then your right foot will catch here. So then you have all that time to work the ground. But there are people who throw far like this. And again, I bet you in her drills, she stays on the ground a lot longer. You know, when you're going these speeds, your right foot just picks up. You know, because you also don't want to think about your right foot picking up. You want to think about just moving the ball. As long as you move the ball and have a counter, your body will do the work. Now, it's easier said than done, you know. Like when you're throwing like 70 plus meters, you know, there's like 800 pounds of force from your hand that you're trying to counter from your hand from your core to your hand to the hammer. So it's easier said than done. So my recommendation for hammer throwers is do a lot of glute, core, and quad exercises. You know, you don't really need very strong arms to throw a hammer. Like, you don't really need a big bench or upper body. You know, I'm not saying don't do that stuff, especially if you're not only a hammer thrower, you know, because, you know, you need a strong bench and overhead stuff to throw a shot on disc far. So, but if you're just like programming yourself for hammer, you know, you can get away with just doing squats, single leg stuff, a lot of core, a lot of back extensions, and just stuff like that. You don't really need that much upper body. The upper body stuff just comes from just one throwing hammer. You just need to be strong enough to wind a hammer correctly. That's really it. Like, you can't be weak. That's not what I'm saying, but it's not something you really focus on in hammer. Because in hammer, you want really loose arms and really loose shoulders, because length in the hammer, the longer your arms are, the more radius you have, and the faster you can work the ball. Alright? Because, again, there's no real... Your arms have to be strong enough to wind the hammer and to be able to hold on to the hammer. And be able to, like, withstand the forces that you're producing with the hammer. That's really it. I'm not saying you can just be like a little weakling. Obviously, all these hammer throwers are immensely strong, but mostly lower body and torso. It's a very unique build. But again, those are like just purely hammer throwers, like hammer throwers that this like people who only do hammer. But I mean, there are different schools of thought, So some people are like, "Oh, you need to be really strong as hell," and I mean, both sides work, But it's just what I've been taught. So you're just you know, that's really it. That's really all I have to say. Just extremely. Oh, sorry. There is actually one more thing. I really love how she sticks this finish. She's just here and just sticks it. And I tend to think that is the best way to finish. It's kind of like a non-reverse in discus. I tend to equate that to sticking the finish in hammer, because that just means you're just perfectly on balance at the finish. All the energy went into the hammer. Now, you will see a lot of hammer throwers when they go the right foot will stay here, but then their left the left foot will go over here. Will like slide over here or step over here. And that's fine, but you also want to make sure that you go that way and not this way. Because if you go this way, that means the hammer pulled you and you lost your counter. If you go this way, that's normal. Especially when you're throwing these kind of distances. It's extremely hard to stick a hammer when you're throwing like 70 plus meters. There's very few hammer throwers that actually do that. So it's not a big worry if you like go that way. Now, you don't want to fall that way. You want to still be on balance and stuff, but the worst thing on the finish is if you get pulled that way. Like if you release the hammer and then you stagger this way, and this is if you're a right-hander, opposite applies to a left-hander. You don't want that. You don't want to go there, because that means you lost your counter and it just pulled you that way, and you'll probably just fall, honestly. When you're going these speeds, if you get pulled that way, you're just gonna fly into this cage. So that's the last thing I think I'll say. Yeah, I don't think there's really anything else. But yeah, I think she's just very underrated. And once again, I'll put her accomplishments, personal best, height and weight, coach, and all that in the video description. And hope you guys have a good day. See you later.